Now you transfer the name of this house to me.
Father hopes you know your mistakes and correct them.
This is what you brought upon yourself.
All right, step into the vehicle, please. Watch your head.
Late afternoon on Riverside Lane, Portland. The last rays of the day streamed through the old windows, painting the kitchen a warm yellow, where Thomas Grant once sat peeling potatoes for his wife and teaching his children to make pancakes on Sunday mornings. Today, in that same kitchen, his only son sat, not for breakfast, but to claim his house. "You should sign," Dr. Nathan Grant said coldly, placing the thick file on the oak table. The cover was printed in bold letters: Property Transfer and Guardianship Agreement. Each word was like a knife cutting into his chest. Rebecca, Nathan's wife, a young lawyer, stood in the doorway, holding a cup of coffee like a judge at an audition. "We just want the best for you," she said, her smile as thin as a knife. "You've lost so much already. You shouldn't be here alone." Thomas looked around the room. The refrigerator still had a note from his late wife, Evelyn. "Don't forget to water your orchids every morning. Love, Evie." The handwriting was shaky from illness, but full of love. He reached out and touched the paper, as if to keep the old warmth. "This is your mother's home," he said slowly. "I'm not leaving." Nathan sighed, pulled out his phone and opened the notes section. Rebecca already talked to the lawyer. "Dad is showing signs of cognitive decline. Insomnia, depression, paranoia. We just want to help." The room was silent for a few seconds. Only the ticking of the wall clock could be heard. As if counting down to the explosion, Thomas smiled slightly. The smile of someone who had seen dozens of houses burn down, who knew that sometimes the fire did not come from gasoline, but from people's hearts. "Do you really think I'm crazy?" Rebecca stepped forward, set her cup down on the table, and said in a monotone, "You are incapable of managing nearly $3 million worth of assets. Dad was a hero, but now he is living in the past. This is the most reasonable choice." The light from the window fell on Thomas's face. Half light, half shadow. A cold light flashed in his eyes. "Whose choice is it, Rebecca?" Her smile froze for a moment. Nathan interjected, "Dad, I just want to be safe. Rebecca's right. The doctors say that people who lose their spouses are more likely to have impaired executive function." "What doctor?" "Me," Nathan replied, his voice trailing off. The air broke. Thomas raised his head, his eyes shining brightly, not as weak as they had imagined. "So today you are a doctor, a judge, and a son, right?" His voice was deep but resonant. Each word seemed to have smoke and fire. Rebecca was about to say something, but Thomas raised his hand to stop her. "What do you know about loneliness? About listening to the person you love forget your name every day for 8 years, and then smiling as you teach her all over again? What do you know about having to choose between your pension and the life of the person you love?" Nathan bowed his head, his eyes averted. Rebecca stood straight, unmoved. "You're being emotional. We're just worried about you. If you don't sign today, we'll be forced to conduct a legal capacity assessment." The word expertise rang out like a lock slamming on an iron door. Thomas looked at them, the son he had carried on his shoulders, and the daughter-in-law he had once called Dad at their first dinner. Now they were on opposite sides of the battle line. He stood up. "Give me a moment." His voice was calm, but his eyes made Rebecca flinch. Thomas walked into the small office where a photo of him and his teammates rescuing a child from a fire in 1999 hung. Beneath the photo was an old wooden drawer. He opened it and took out a small, compact item, a black tape recorder with a blinking red light. Next to it was a yellowed notebook. Evelyn, Days of Care. He squeezed it in his hand and whispered, "Evie, now it's my turn to keep you fair." When Rebecca returned to the kitchen, she had begun sorting through the papers, as if the house were hers. Nathan stood leaning against the wall, absent-minded, his eyes filled with worry. "Is this the end, Dad?" he asked. Thomas set the recorder down on the table, almost politely. "No," he replied, his voice hoarse but clear. "This is just the beginning." Rebecca raised her eyebrows. "Do you think you can beat us? I'm a lawyer, Nathan's a doctor. The whole city trusts us." Thomas smiled, a deep smile as if he had seen the end. "Have you forgotten, Rebecca? They say a small fire cannot consume a building, but all it takes is a well-placed spark." He turned on the recording switch. The click was clear. Rebecca stiffened. Nathan looked confused. Thomas looked up, his eyes calm. And Dad never forgot how to light a fire. A cold wind blew through the window, making the "love, you, Evie" note tremble. The sunlight faded. The kitchen fell silent. Outside, the autumn leaves began to flutter. Inside, another fire, smoldering, invisible, had just been lit. After that afternoon, the kitchen returned to its old silence. But in Thomas Grant's mind, the conversation with his son was like a spark, burning back in time, back to the years when he still believed family was the safest place. 8 years ago, Evelyn was still teaching at Cedar Valley Elementary School, where students brought her flowers for the holidays. The day the doctor said the word Alzheimer's, Tom heard only a long, shrill sound in his head, like the fire alarm he had known all his life. But this time, no one could put out the fire. From that day on, he woke before dawn. He made coffee, prepared her medicine, and put notes all over the walls. "This is Evie's bedroom. Tom is my husband." Every day, he taught his wife his own name. At first, Evelyn smiled sheepishly. "I forgot again." But by the second year, that smile was gone. There was only the look of a lost child in her own home. Tom called his son 127 times that first year. 127 times to tell him that his mother still remembered his laugh, that there was still room in the kitchen for Christmas dinner. Nathan answered only 18 times. Each time his voice was hurried, mixed with the clatter of a keyboard, and the woman's voice in the background. "Dad, I'm in surgery. Rebecca said, you should let the nurse take care of Mom. I'm busy." Busy thus became a cover for everything: responsibility, love, and even guilt. 3 years later, a local TV news program reported, "Dr. Nathan Grant, Compassionate Doctor of the Year." Tom sat on the sofa. Next to him was Evelyn, her hair white as snow, her hand trembling as she held the remote control. Time 400 spoom. When Nathan's face appeared on the screen, she softly asked, "Honey, is he coming home for Christmas?" The question repeated itself all evening. Tom could only hold her hand, trying to swallow his sobs. On the screen, Nathan was smiling brightly, receiving his award amid flashbulbs. And on the ground floor, a mother was slowly forgetting the face of her own child. Time continued to scratch at her father's soul. Evelyn stopped eating, stopped talking, just sitting, staring out into the backyard, where Nathan had played on the swing as a child. Sometimes she would smile and wave her hand to the air. "Look, the boy is calling you." Tom turned back, only to see the wind blowing through the empty yard. He quietly cut her hair, rereading old diary pages, listening to the clock count down to the day his wife died. On the last night, Evelyn held his hand tightly, her eyes half awake, half asleep. "Tom, when I forget everything, will you still remember me?" He bent down, kissed her forehead. "I will remember. For both of us." The next morning, the monitor stopped. Tom sat by her bed, holding her cold hand for 2 hours. No crying, just silence. The house, once filled with laughter, was now filled only with the sound of the clock and the gasps of the people left behind. The funeral took place in a misty gray rain. No flowers from Nathan, no card from Rebecca, just a few neighbors, and him, in his old suit, standing before a stone tablet that read, "Evelyn Grant, the keeper of lost hearts." The morning paper, blown by the wind and wet with rain, stuck to the ground, right in front of her grave. The front page carried a picture of Nathan, smiling brightly, and the headline, "The doctor saved the lives of hundreds of patients." Tom looked at the picture for a long time. The rain mixed with his tears. He only spoke softly, his voice as low as cold ashes. "You saved the world, Nathan, but you left your mother to die, alone." From that day on, the house on Riverside no longer had laughter, no longer had the smell of apple pie. There was only one man and a small notebook recording each day. He waited for a call that never came. Tom closed the book and placed it on his wife's altar. The candlelight fell on the photo. Evelyn was smiling, her smile still as gentle as ever. He whispered, "Evie, if there is a place after death, I hope you remember I kept my word." Then he stood up and looked around the empty house. The pale light filtered through the curtains and fell on the old note, "Don't forget to water your orchids every morning." Tom smiled sadly and watered the orchid. The petals trembled, and one fell to the floor, like a sob of the soul. It seemed like it would end there, but it didn't. Loneliness, if suppressed for too long, turns into a different kind of fire, colder, more dangerous, and more precise than any knife. Finally, I want to ask you, if you were Thomas, who sacrificed his whole life for others, and the child you raised came back, just to take away the last thing you had, what would you choose? 1. Forgive and stay silent? Or 2. Stand up, even just once, to demand justice for the deceased? Do you choose A or B? Every tragedy has a breaking point. For Thomas Grant, it came 3 weeks after Evelyn's funeral, when his only son knocked on the door of the house that had barely finished burning. The house on Riverside Lane still smelled of lavender, the scent Evelyn loved. Her picture was still on the wall, candles still lit every night. When there was a knock at the door, Tom smiled. just a little. A small part of him still wanted to believe. Nathan had come home to apologize. But when he opened the door, he saw Rebecca standing beside him, wearing an expensive coat, holding a thick file in her arms. Nathan stood silently behind, like a shadow, no longer the warmth of the son he once was. "Dad," Rebecca began, her voice soft, yet sharp. "We're worried about you. After the recent shock, you're not mentally prepared to manage your finances. You're showing signs of losing your sense of reality." Tom didn't answer. He quietly placed 2 cups of tea on the table and gestured for them to sit. Rebecca opened her bag, pulling out a stack of papers, a petition for legal guardianship. "This is the most humane option," she said. "Nathan will temporarily retain the right to sign over the assets. Dad will still be here, just needing supervision to avoid risks." The word monitoring dropped on the table like a pebble, but in Tom's heart, it exploded like a fire alarm. He looked at them for a long time. No anger, only the terrifying silence of someone who has lived with loss. 3 weeks, he whispered hoarsely. "Only 3 weeks. After burying your mother, and you're already thinking about the house?" Nathan bowed his head. Rebecca clenched her pen, her voice cold as steel. "Dad is emotional. He needs treatment. Nathan can certify his mental state, and we'll take care of the legalities. It's all for him." Tom laughed dryly, the sound echoing through the hollow house. "For me? Or for this house?" The air grew heavy. Nathan raised his head, forcing calm. "Rebecca just wants to secure your future. Don't misunderstand." Tom placed his hands on the table and stood up. The light from the window split his face, half in light, half in shadow, half human, half ashes. "Son," he said slowly, each word like a blade. "When I walked into the fire, they said I was crazy. But if it weren't for crazy men, no one would have survived. I may be old, but my memory is still sharp enough to remember every word you just said. And believe me, what I remember will save me or destroy you." Rebecca's voice turned harsh. "Are you threatening us?" Tom walked toward the cabinet, his footsteps heavy, like the final hammering of patience. He opened the drawer and took out a black tape recorder, the same one that had captured Evelyn's trembling voice each night when she forgot her husband's name. Now, it would record something else. The truth. The red light came on, a soft click. "I just want to hear you say it again, Nathan," he murmured. "You said I was crazy, right?" Nathan froze, glancing toward Rebecca. She quickly pulled his hand back. "There's no need to prove anything, Dad. You don't realize your condition." Tom's eyes narrowed. His voice dropped, cold as ashes. "Yes, I don't recognize my condition, but I recognize your faces very clearly." Rebecca stood up, folding the file with stiff precision. "We'll file the petition with the court this week. We hope you'll cooperate to avoid any unpleasant incidents." Nathan tried to speak, but Rebecca pulled him toward the door. Before leaving, she turned back, her gaze arrogant, unflinching. "I will prove to the law that you are no longer able to defend yourself." The door closed. The sound echoed through the house. marking the end of what was once called family. Tom stood still. A single raindrop fell from the eaves. In the silence, the red light on the recorder kept blinking, like the heartbeat of a man who had stopped being afraid. He took a deep breath, his voice hoarse but unbroken. If you believe I am weak, then just wait and see what a weak man can do. He placed the recorder on Evelyn's altar, the candlelight reflecting in his weary, burning eyes. Outside, thunder rumbled. A new storm was coming. Question for you. If you were in Tom's place and your own child stood with outsiders, using the law and your reputation to strip away your honor, which would you choose? Time and mouse 100 miles long. 1. Fight back with the truth. 2. Let go and watch them destroy themselves. In his career as a firefighter, Thomas Grant had seen hundreds of fires. He had run into roaring infernos that devoured entire buildings in hours, and he had stood by house fires that hissed and died within an attic. Yet the ones that stayed with him longest were never the spectacular blazes that made the evening news. They were the fires that burned without light, embers that glowed beneath the surface of people's lives, fed by silence, neglect, and slow betrayal. Those were the fires that left a scent in the chest, a heat that no water could cool. Some burned down entire buildings, but others smoldered, slow-burning, smokeless, odorless, and never extinguished until it reached his heart. He learned early on that a man could survive 1,000 flames and still be consumed by a single, patient ember of shame or sorrow. That knowledge sat in Tom like an old scar, constant, sometimes numb, occasionally flaring when memory brushed it. 3 weeks after the "dad is insane" threat, that fire inside him began to live again. It started small, a recollection of a voicemail, a flash of a text, an image of Evelyn alone in a hospital corridor. Then the heat climbed, calm, deliberate. He found himself waking at 3 a.m. with plans sketched on napkins, pausing during the day to study legal forms and foundation charters, replaying Rebecca's check-in photo until it was burned into his mind. The world around him felt both familiar and foreign. People carried on as if nothing had happened while his private furnace stoked. The Portland morning was bitterly cold. Steam was covering the windows of the small law office on Hawthorne Avenue. He pulled his collar up against the chill and walked past the bakery that always smelled of cinnamon. The city had that wet, salt-smoothed breath that makes people walk faster and speak less. Hawthorne Avenue, with its mix of thrift stores and second-hand bookstores, had always been a place where small tragedies and small victories rubbed shoulders. On that morning, the steam on the windows looked like halos around the names written there, as if those letters were being consecrated by weather itself. The old sign still bore the name, Marilyn Cooper, attorney at law. The brass letters had worn soft at the edges from decades of rain. They read like an oath. Inside, the office smelled of old paper and coffee, an honest smell that suited Marilyn. The woman who had accompanied Tom through dangerous fires was now graying, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. Those eyes belonged to someone who had seen people at their worst and held them to account. She had counseled victims who wanted setong, vengeance, and clients who wanted mercy. She knew the weight of both. Tom trusted those eyes because they never flinched at truth. When Tom entered, she looked up. silent for a few seconds. Her silence was not shock, but calculation. She measured risk as she always did. Tom, my God, look at you. There was tenderness lodged under the shock. She spoke like someone who had known him before all the labels, before public whispers. No need for pity, Marilyn, he said softly. I didn't come here to complain. His voice had the dry, controlled quality of a man who had learned to keep flame and water separate, never letting emotion flood the plan. They sat down, and for the first time in 8 years, Tom opened the old leather briefcase that always sat on his wife's altar. The briefcase smelled faintly of tobacco and lavender. It was a relic from their life before hospitals and hearings. He had placed it on the altar, on the small table with Evelyn's picture, so often that it had a worn patch where his thumb rested. Opening it felt like opening a ledger of wounds. Inside was evidence of 8 painful years of abandonment. There were bills like battle plans, receipts like witness statements, each sheet an accusation written in numbers. The pages rustled with a sound that could have been shame or liberation, depending on who was listening. The hospital bills piled up, the receipts for all payments from his personal account. Each invoice told a story of sleepless nights and small heroic acts, medications administered, transport fees paid, nurses bribed with coffee and grateful smiles. These were debts he had accepted. They had come with nights of waiting and the slow erosion of savings. A screenshot of Nathan's, "I'm busy, let Rebecca take care of it" text message. Tom stared at that line until the words became a totem of neglect. I'm busy. A phrase used to build distance, to outsource responsibility to the nearest willing hands. It read like a verdict. And on the computer screen, a clip of Rebecca checking in at the resort in Hawaii, the same day Evelyn was in the ICU. The clip was short but merciless. A sunlit lobby, a cocktail, Rebecca's smile in a frame where a daughter should instead have been at a hospital bed. It was the kind of visual evidence that keeps memory honest, impossible to argue away. Marilyn looked at each photograph, her eyes growing red. She had expected legal complexity. She had not expected the personal cruelty that the photographs suggested. When she reached the last one, of Evelyn lying in a hospital bed, her thin hand still clutching her wedding ring, she choked up. Even the hardest lawyers sometimes become witnesses to private grief, and in that office, legal procedure gave way to human sorrow. Oh my God, Tom, this is the coldest crime I've ever seen. They left a mother to die. The accusation hung in the room like steam. Cold, deliberate desertion. Marilyn's face registered a lawyer's contempt and a woman's indignation linked together. Tom did not cry. He just shrugged slightly, his voice hoarse but resolute. If people forget, Marilyn, remind them with the truth, not with tears. He had seen the futility of public sobs before. The court of public opinion could be as fickle as weather. He wanted something that could not evaporate. A memorial, a foundation, an act of permanent restitution. Marilyn leaned back in her chair and looked at him for a long moment. She weighed ethics against emotion, law against a man's grief. What do you want? The question was simple but monumental. It opened the door to possible futures. I won't wait for them to stab me first, Tom said. I'll strike first, but it must be bright enough for the whole world to see. He imagined headlines, press rooms, cameras catching that one frame where a lie unraveled. He wanted exposure to be surgical, precise, unavoidable. She raised an eyebrow. You're going to sue? Tom shook his head, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. His smile had no humor. It had the grim satisfaction of someone about to light a beacon. No, I don't want money. I want justice. Evelyn deserves something to carry her name, not a stolen will. Justice, in his mind, took the shape of a foundation that would outlive gossip and inheritance lawyers. It would be a vessel for memory made durable. He slid a new piece of paper toward her. A consent to sell the house on Riverside Lane. $2.8 million. The ink on the paper looked small against the magnitude of the act. The house on Riverside Lane had been theirs, the place where summers smelled of mown grass and evenings held the quiet safety of ordinary love. He set it down like a sacrament. That money, he said, will go to the Evelyn Grant Alzheimer's Research Foundation. The name felt right in his mouth. Simple, dignified, impossible to ignore. A foundation could fund research, pay for care, and put Evelyn's name on something that battled forgetfulness rather than stealing from it. Marilyn froze. Tom, are you sure? That house is... She thought of market values and emotional losses, of the clients who clung to property like lifeboats. Where I was happy, he interrupted, and where they want to be proof of my insanity, I will make them see every brick of it turned into justice. He pictured the house transformed, rooms converted into labs, a plaque on the wall, a research wing that bore Evelyn's name instead of a signature forged by greed. That vision warmed the ember inside him, turning it from anger into purpose. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Outside, a siren somewhere in Portland faded into the urban murmur. Inside, two people planned an act that would echo beyond the office walls. Marilyn took a deep breath, her voice low. How are you going to announce it? Tom leaned back, his eyes distant. Publicly. Where they can't hide. St. Clair's Hospital. Where Nathan flaunts his reputation as a model doctor, and Rebecca hangs out with the elite. I'll let the world see who they really are. He imagined a press conference in the hospital courtyard, cameras catching the uncomfortable faces of those who had chosen luxury over duty. He imagined questions, an avalanche of headlines, and a public that could not unread the facts. Marilyn stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the pouring rain outside. She had done publicity before. She understood that truth could be sharpened by strategy. Do you understand the consequences? If you do that, you will ruin everything. Tom smiled, his eyes determined. Marilyn, the day I chose to leave the fire department to care for Evelyn, I lost everything. Now I have only one thing left to save, the honor of the woman I love. Honor to him was not a thing of ceremony. It was the small, relentless faithfulness shown in nights by a hospital bed, in the refusal to hand over that last dignity to people who would sell it. He signed his name, his pen firmly, as if extinguishing a flame, but also lighting a new explosion. The stroke of the pen felt like a ritual both simple and enormous. With it, he traded a private loss for a public instrument. The ink was hardly dry when Tom stood up, put on his hat, and turned to look at the photograph of Evelyn hanging on the wall. In the photograph, she smiled the way she used to, softly, without the weight of neglect. He carried that image like armor. You see, Evie? They think my fire is out. But I've lived my whole life in fire. I know how to keep it burning in the right place. He spoke to the picture as if to the living. Speaking aloud made the plan real and the ember purposeful. Marilyn gathered up the files, her voice low. She folded the receipts with an almost ceremonial care, filing indignation next to evidence. "Tom, are you going to tell them?" "No," he replied, smiling coldly. "I want them to find out for themselves, between the flashbulbs and the cameras." There was an artistry to his plan, revelation staged like theater, truth dressed in unavoidable light. He tightened his grip on his briefcase and walked out the door. Outside, the rain had stopped, the sky opening in a silver streak. The city seemed to exhale. Streaks of sunlight cut through clouds like a promise. He felt lighter in a way he hadn't in years. Light from purpose, not from consolation. Before leaving, he turned back and added, "When a traitor uses the law to cover his crime, the best justice is the truth exposed in the light." Words like flint, sharp, intended to spark. He felt a calmness that comes when one finally matches action to conviction. The door closed, leaving Marilyn standing there. She watched him go, aware that the man she had known, a firefighter, a husband, a weary defender, had become something else, an architect of exposure. She looked at the papers, her eyes a mixture of pity and admiration. In the small room, the rain finally stopped, as if the whole city of Portland were holding its breath, waiting for the impending explosion. And the explosion would not be of violence but of revelation, a public unmasking that would demand reckoning, and perhaps a strange kind of healing. And what about you? If your blood relative betrayed you and used the law to take away the last honor of the person you love, what would you do? One, forgive for peace, too. Or fight back to regain justice even if it means giving up everything. Do you choose A or B? The next day, the rain stopped. Portland glowed with rare April sunshine. From his second-story window, Thomas Grant looked down on the street where he and Evelyn had once planted their red maple trees, where there had once been laughter. There was now the sound of chausses, the snap of measuring tape, and the sharp clacking of high heels on wet pavement. A luxury car pulled up, its license plate flashing. The first to step out was Rebecca Pierce, in an off-white coat, her face cold. Behind her, a real estate agent holding a file. Nathan followed, wearing sunglasses, trying to avoid the eyes of the neighbors. "Here, this place can be expanded with a garage. This area is hot. Prices are going up fast," the broker said brightly. Rebecca nodded, her voice even, detached. "Good. I want it done within a month. He won't object. He's confused." The words came through the half-open door, clear and cruel. Tom stood still, not moving, not speaking, just watching them, as if watching an old movie replay of his life, but with the main character now being seen as a useless, old man. Across the yard, Mrs. Henderson, a widow who had lived next door for 20 years, was watering her plants. At Rebecca's voice, she turned and frowned. Rebecca continued, louder, clearer, so that everyone could hear. "He can't remember the day of the week, gets the wrong medicine, the wrong person, sell early, to keep the price." The broker nodded eagerly, taking notes. Nathan stayed silent, his eyes avoiding his father's, as if the shame was too heavy to bear. Mrs. Henderson put down her watering can and quietly flipped open her phone. The camera turned on. The lens shook slightly, but it captured Rebecca's gesture, her voice sharp and clear, like a blade. Tom stood behind the curtain, eyes fixed on the photograph of Evelyn on the table, The woman who had once said, "If anyone wrongs you, do not let anger win. Let justice prevail." His hands trembled slightly, partly from age, but mostly from restraint. Rebecca smiled, shook the broker's hand, and said loudly, "Hopefully the new buyer will revive this house. It would be a waste to have a confused person living here." Passers-by stared. Whispers spread. Was Mr. Grant really out of his mind? He used to be a fire chief. How could he let his daughter-in-law bring a realtor to measure his house? Tom had faced the fiercest fires in his life, but never one this cold and humiliating. He opened the door and stepped out. Rebecca froze, then quickly regained her poise. "Are you going out? I'm just helping you. This house needs a new owner." Tom looked at her, his eyes not angry, just sad. "You know, Rebecca," he said softly, "people only sell what they own, and I don't remember ever giving you the keys to this house." Rebecca smiled faintly. "You're confused. Nathan and I are just protecting the family fortune." "Family?" Tom repeated, his voice trembling. "You have no right to use that word here." Nathan started to speak, but Rebecca squeezed his hand and raised her voice, loud enough for everyone to hear. "See, man? Classic signs of senility, paranoia, defensiveness, loss of reality." Then, a bang, not a slap. A wooden door, slamming shut. Tom had turned away, shutting out the noise, the humiliation, the betrayal. Inside, he stood still, his back against the wall, eyes closed. Outside, Rebecca's laughter echoed like daggers. Afternoon. Mrs. Henderson knocked on the door, hands trembling as she held her phone. "Tom, I think you need to see this." She showed him the video. Rebecca's words, clear as daylight. "He's lost." Tom watched, his eyes lighting up, not with joy, but with the fire he'd been waiting for. A small piece of evidence, but the first spark in a plan he'd been building for weeks. He turned to the photo of his wife, placing his calloused hand on the frame. "Rest in peace, Evie. The day of justice is near." The candlelight flickered, reflecting a terrifyingly bright glint in his eyes. For the first time in many years, the man's eyes burned again. "What about you? If you were publicly humiliated by your own family, in the place you once called home, what would you do?" Option A, stay silent, so they think you're weak. Or Option B, smile. Wait for the right moment and make them understand who's really crazy. For a week after the humiliation on Riverside Street, Thomas Grant had spoken to no one. But tonight, the whole city would hear him speak and hear the truth they had been ignoring. The floodlights blazed in the lobby of St. Clair Medical Center. Inside the hospital's annual gala, a gathering of the medical community, the press, and sponsoring law firms, was being called the Night of Fame. For Thomas, it would be the night of justice. On stage, the backdrop shimmered. Alzheimer Research Benefit, honoring the Evelyn Grant Foundation. The words stopped Nathan as soon as he entered. Rebecca kept her professional smile, unaware the game had changed. "Why did Dad invite us here?" Nathan whispered. "Don't worry," Rebecca replied quietly, confidently. "He just wants to prove himself. Just stand there and smile, that's all." When the MC introduced honorary donor, former Fire Chief Thomas Grant, the room erupted in applause. Tom stepped forward. No fancy tuxedo, just his old dark blue suit, the one Evelyn had chosen for him on their 40th anniversary. He smiled, his voice low and calm. I am not a man of lights. I am more accustomed to smoke and fire. But today, I have a little story about a house, a wife, and a thing called the truth. The whole room was silent. On the large screen behind him, a photo of the house on Riverside Lane appeared. Windows bathed in sunlight, maple trees shedding their autumn leaves. This is where my wife Evelyn and I lived for 42 years. I cared for her the last 8 years of her life, as Alzheimer's robbed her of her memories. She forgot everything, except one thing. That love is never worth selling. He stopped, looking straight down at the front row, where Nathan and Rebecca were sitting. I used to think my son understood that. A murmur spread through the room. Rebecca squeezed Nathan's hand, her eyes wary. Tom continued, his voice soft, but sharp as a knife. 3 weeks after I buried my wife, 2 of my closest loved ones came to see me. They brought the law, papers, and a psychiatric diagnosis. They said I was not mentally fit to keep this house. The audience held its breath. So I sold it. But not to them. I sold it to the truth. The stage lights changed. Tom took out the black tape recorder, his 8-year-old companion, from his pocket, and pressed a button. Nathan's voice echoed through the hall. Dad is not sane enough to keep the property. Sign it, or we will ask for guardianship. Rebecca's voice cut in, cold and commanding. Tell him you care about his health. Emphasize the legal aspect. The auditorium erupted in stunned murmurs. Cameras turned to the front row. Nathan bowed his head. Rebecca paled, lips trembling, but she said nothing. Tom raised his hand. The screen behind him changed. Images from social media appeared. Rebecca raising a glass of wine in Napa Valley, captioned, "Life's too short for family drama." The date, the exact same time Evelyn was in the ICU. A gasp rippled through the crowd. A doctor whispered, "Unbelievable." A reporter started recording. Tom's voice grew stronger. The house they intended to rob was sold. The entire amount, $2.8 million, now goes to the Evelyn Grant Alzheimer's Research Foundation. I chose to turn what they considered an asset into something they could never possess. Dignity. Behind him, attorney Marilyn Cooper stood up. I am Mr. Grant's legal representative. All legal recordings, authentic evidence. If anyone wants to deny, the Portland court and media are ready to listen. The auditorium exploded with applause. Rebecca stood up, trembling. This is slander. But Nathan pulled her hand back. His eyes were empty. For the first time, he understood what it meant to lose everything. Enough, Rebecca. We lost. Tom left the podium, walking past them. He stopped, looked at his son, and said softly, I don't need to win. I just need justice. For you and your mother. Then he walked away. Slowly. But each step was like a hammer driving nails into Tot, the conscience of the traitors. As he stepped outside, the first snow of the season began to fall lightly on the hospital porch. Behind him, flashes still flickered, and in Tom's eyes the last fire had faded into peace. Question for you. If you were Tom after making the world witness the truth, how would you feel? 1, excited for justice? Or 2, empty, because you know that to get the truth, you had to lose your loved ones forever? Do you choose A or B? The gala was over, but the aftershocks were not. What erupted at St. Clair Medical Center that day was like a fire that swept through Portland, fast, fierce, and unquenchable. The next morning, newspapers were filled with headlines. Shocking medical legal scandal. Doctor and lawyer conspire to seize father's estate. A photo of Tom on a podium. Nathan and Rebecca behind him, looking distraught, appeared on every news site. Social media was ablaze. People shared a recording of Tom saying, "I sold my house for the truth." The phrase became iconic. A hashtag went viral, #TheFireInside. 3 days later, the Oregon Medical Ethics Board sent out a notice. Dr. Nathan Grant was suspended indefinitely. The investigation expanded to include unethical conduct and personal abuse of medical position. At the same time, the prestigious law firm Pierce and Lowell Associates announced that Rebecca Pierce had been fired, stripped of all benefits, and was cooperating with the Ethics Board's investigation. Reporters crowded their doorstep. The woman who once walked proudly through the courtroom now hid in the shadows, afraid of the flashbulbs shining directly on her. As for Nathan, he returned to St. Clair Hospital, the pride of his life. But today, every glance, every nod, carried disappointment. He walked past the hallway where the photo of Compassionate Doctor of the Year still hung, and suddenly realized the face in that glass frame now only made people hate. He stopped in front of it, eyes red. "I thought I did it out of logic, out of reason." His voice trembled. "But I forgot. You were the one who taught me to save people, not rob them of their trust." The door opened. The hospital director and a member of the ethics committee stood waiting. One of them said softly, "Nathan, we need your ID card." The ID slipped from his neck, fell to the floor with a dry click, like the seal of a career. That afternoon, in the middle of the empty hallway, Nathan knelt, down. His hands touched the cold floor, tears falling uncontrollably. His voice broke, fragile, like a lost child. "Mom, I'm sorry. I left you. I let others speak for me. I forgot who truly loved me." Behind him, Thomas's footsteps echoed. He carried no hatred, only weariness, older than his years. Standing before his son, he said softly, "Evelyn can forgive Nathan, but honor is not given. It is earned." Nathan looked up, tears mixing with a bitter smile. "I know, and I will start paying the price, starting today." Tom nodded, eyes cold yet warm. Then he turned and walked away, leaving his son in his own tears. That night, Rebecca tried to leave the law office, but as soon as she stepped into the parking lot, dozens of cameras turned toward her. One reporter shouted, "Do you have anything to say about the abuse of your father-in-law?" She walked quickly, silent, her face half covered by her coat. Another called out, "Do you regret it, Attorney Pierce?" Rebecca paused for half a second. Flashes lit her face, reflecting a single tear. But then she kept walking. No answer. No look back. A week later, the Portland Tribune's front page read, "A Father Teaches America Honesty." A photo of Tom smiling beside the Evelyn Grant Research Foundation became a symbol of hope. People left flowers at the entrance, letters of thanks, to a man who had nothing left, but still held on to what mattered most: justice. Tom read the article one morning, then folded it carefully beside Evelyn's photo. He whispered, "You see, Evie, the truth always wins in the end. But the price, is it worth it?" The wind blew gently. The orchids swayed, like the soft reply of his departed wife. He closed his eyes, letting sunlight rest on his aged face. Outside, church bells echoed, the sound of an ending and a beginning of redemption. And what about you? If you were Tom, justice on your side, but your family torn apart, what would you choose? Option 1, forgive, to heal. Option 2, keep boundaries, to protect the honor of the deceased. Do you choose A or B? After the storm passed, Portland returned to peace. But inside Thomas Grant, something still burned. Not the fire of anger, but the fire of survival. 6 months later. Early morning, pale yellow sunlight poured through the glass of the new building on the St. Clair Medical Center campus. The words on the bronze wall glowed in the sunlight. Evelyn Grant Research Pavilion, for hearts that have not forgotten love. People came to the inauguration ceremony. Reporters, nurses, former patients, and even families still fighting the disease that robbed their loved ones of their memories. Among the crowd, Thomas walked slowly, holding a bouquet of white orchids, the flowers Evelyn had cared for during her last years. A female reporter approached, her voice trembling with emotion. "Mr. Grant, you lost everything. Why did you choose to return to this place, filled with painful memories?" He smiled, a gentle, quiet smile, but no longer sad. "Because here," he said softly, "I don't see the end. I only see the beginning of others." After the ceremony, he stayed, not as a founder, but as a volunteer. Every morning, he made coffee for relatives of patients, showed directions to newcomers, cleaned the glass where the photos of benefactors hung. Small things, but they helped him feel like he was still living for Evelyn, in the gentlest way. In the afternoon, he often sat by the second-floor window, watching young families bring their parents into the treatment center. Occasionally, he saw himself, 8 years ago, holding Evelyn's hand as they walked through the dimly lit corridors. He smiled and whispered, "You see, Evie, where there was darkness, there is now light." One October morning, in the air filled with the scent of orchids, Thomas heard familiar footsteps behind him. Turning around, he saw Nathan, long hair, gaunt face, no longer the successful doctor he once was. On his shirt was a small name tag, Time 300 Volunteer, Nathan G. No one spoke for a few seconds. Only the steady hum of the air purifier and the morning sunlight streaming through the glass, dividing 2 generations. A father who had been betrayed, a son seeking redemption. Nathan took a deep breath, his voice choked. "Dad, I didn't come to ask for forgiveness. I just wanted to do something useful for Mom." Thomas looked at him, said nothing, just walked closer and lightly touched the name tag on his son's chest. "This," he chuckled softly, "not everyone can wear it." Nathan bowed his head, tears falling onto the shiny tile floor. "I know. You deserve to be proud of me, not ashamed of me." That afternoon, they both worked in the family counseling area. Nathan was coaching a young couple on how to care for their father, who was in the early stages of Alzheimer's. Thomas sat back, quietly observing. When the young husband thanked Nathan, he replied, "I had a father who did this alone for 8 years. He taught me that loving someone is not about how many times you say, 'I love you,' but about staying when they no longer remember who you are." The words silenced the room. Tom bowed his head slightly, hiding his smile. For the first time in years, he saw something in his son's eyes that reminded him of Evelyn. Later that afternoon, father and son stood before the wall engraved with the name, Evelyn Grant. The sunlight slanted through the glass frame, shining directly on the bronze letters, glowing like a halo. Thomas spoke softly, his voice low but warm. "There are boundaries to protect what you love, and there are also doors. If you want to open them again, you must knock with your heart." Nathan nodded, tears falling. He put his hand on his son's shoulder. "No one is born knowing how to love properly, Nathan. Your mother just wants to see you learning it again. That's enough." The two stood still, watching the light spread on the bronze plaque. Outside, the church bells rang in the distance, mingling with the laughter of children in the Chausson hospital yard. There was no more smoke, no more tears, only the morning light reflected on the clear glass. The fire had burned out, but the warmth remained. Question for you. If one day, the person who betrayed you truly comes back, not to ask for forgiveness, but to make up for what you lost, what will you do? 1. Close the door for fear of being hurt again. Or 2. Open your heart and give them a chance to make up for their mistakes through actions. Do you choose A or B?